I walked into the courtroom, the worn fabric of my suit brushing against the folders I carried like weapons. 3 folders, $1.2 billion in ownership, and 2 women who believed I was incapable of understanding it. My wife rolled her eyes. Her mother smirked. Their attorney looked ready, polished, confident, smug. "You've never been good with money," my wife whispered to the gallery. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Silence is sharper than any accusation. "Your Honor," I said, calm as a winter lake, "I will be representing myself." Pale. That's what I saw across the room. A flicker of fear in her eyes. Small victories matter when the war is only beginning. The phone call came next. My daughter-in-law, her voice harsh, brittle. "If you want to join Thanksgiving, come wash the dishes." I smiled, carefully measured, in joy. I had already sent photos of my villa in Switzerland, every angle, every sunlit terrace, every reflection of wealth they could never touch. My phone rang 71 times that day. Rings echoing their greed, their surprise, money, status, luxury. None of it mattered, not really. It began with subtle things, a name I didn't recognize, a perfume not mine, a laugh that carried someone else's echo. My instincts prickled, sharp as broken glass. I cataloged, I watched, I listened. Each slip, each glance, each hesitation, it was data. I replayed conversations, measured pauses, analyzed tone. Every nuance became a puzzle piece, and slowly, the image began to take shape. I moved quietly. DNA tests, phone records, discrete observations. My exterior, calm, a mask. Inside, a storm. I couldn't let them see the turbulence beneath. Every dinner, every phone call, every exchange became an opportunity. My wife remained oblivious, her mother too consumed by pride. Every step, every moment a silent march toward revelation. I told myself, patience is sharper than anger. Observation trumps confrontation. Precision defeats chaos. The envelope arrived unceremoniously, no fanfare. DNA results. Confirmed. My daughter, my blood, was not hers. Not by a fraction. My wife's betrayal had been complete, calculated, cold. I met her in the drawing room. She didn't know I held the truth. "Interesting," I said. She froze, mouth opening, closing, no sound emerged. I slid the envelope across the table. The silence became a blade. She opened it. The color drained. Shock, regret, panic. Not enough. Not yet. Her mother appeared, a ghost of guilt. I said nothing. They had ensnared themselves. Courtroom rehearsals were practice for this. Execution. I revealed the legal documents, the ownership rights she thought she could claim. Every clause, precedent, fine print, precise, surgical. My calm unnerved them more than shouts or tears ever could. "You should have known," I said softly, almost casual. "Some things cannot be bought. Not loyalty, not truth." Their faces twisted, mouths opening and closing like fish gasping for air. Their empire of deception began to crumble, slowly, beautifully. I walked away from calls, from messages, from attempts to claw back control. The villa was no longer a trophy. It was a line, a boundary, a reminder. The revelations were only part of it. The psychological victory lingered. I observed them, my wife, her mother, smoldering in the wreckage of their ambition. They had reached too far. They had underestimated me. I never needed to strike with fury. Precision, patience, observation, these were my weapons. They had failed to see the storm behind my calm eyes. The phone stayed silent. Calls went unanswered. Messages ignored. The truth hummed quietly in the edges of my mind, a steady, cold rhythm of vindication. I had everything. They had nothing. I reflected on the daughter I had raised, untangled from lies, shielded from deception. The life I reclaimed, meticulously rebuilt. No tears, no pity, only clarity. I thought of my wife, her mother, their faces, the shock, the despair, the realization. They had believed they could control the narrative. They had not accounted for intellect, for patience, for calculation. Every word I had spoken, every gesture I had made, had been part of a plan. Every silence, a trap. Every moment of perceived weakness, a misdirection. I didn't need to confront them with rage. Rage is for the reckless. I had what mattered: control, truth. Justice served without theatrics, without spectacle. I closed the folders. The courtroom, the villa, the betrayal, they were behind me. The phone lay silent. The world was distant. Yet I was not free in the sense others understand. Freedom, I realized, is measured in detachment, in control, in clarity. I had dismantled a web of deceit without striking a single blow. The greedy shrew, my wife, was crushed by inevitability, not chaos, by patience, not fury, by observation, not impulse. I walked away from the wreckage of greed and betrayal. My reflection in the glass of my villa's terrace looked back at me, calm, unbroken, untouchable. I did not mourn. I did not reconcile. The storm was over. I had weathered it. And I had gained something far greater than revenge: clarity, power, freedom. In silence, I understood I had won not because I fought harder, but because I had thought further, calculated every move, controlled every emotion, waited, watched. The greedy shrew had underestimated me, and that mistake would haunt her forever. I turned away, leaving the past in ruins. I had nothing to reclaim, nothing to forgive, and in the quiet aftermath, I was complete.